that was a tapping section from my song Cosmic Void, which I put out a couple of years ago, and I've gotten a lot of questions about this particular part, so I figured I'd do a quick lesson showing not only how to play it on the guitar, but how I think about these kind of sections and how I might compose something like this. This song uses 8-string guitars for the rhythm parts. Now this particular part doesn't use the lowest string, so I'm going to do it on a 7-string here. It should be a little bit easier to see that way. Now my tuning here is drop A. So I have a standard tuned 6-string guitar on top with a low A. And when I use the 8-string, it's a low E below that A. So it's E, A, and then a standard tuned 6-string guitar. This whole section comes from the C Phrygian mode, and oftentimes when I write something like this, I'll stick within one cool scale sound the whole time. The main inspiration for this part was Tigran Hamasyan, who's an awesome jazz pianist who has a lot of like metal influences, and he's kind of really popular in the metal guitar world too. And so in a lot of his songs, you'll have these big sweeping 16th note parts, and they'll often stick within kind of one scale sound. So that's what I was trying to do here. So I picked the Phrygian mode because it's a really good sound for metal. Now the other thing to talk about here is the rhythm. This part is in 29/16, and that sounds really crazy, and it kind of is, but it's really just some smaller patterns kind of lumped together. So you have 6, 5, 6, 5, and 7 as 16th notes. So here's the first measure played slowly. At the core of this whole section is this basic tapping pattern. 2 notes with the left hand, 1 with the right hand. Now what's weird about this is that the left hand is leading. So I'm doing these hammer-ons from nowhere, where I'm producing the note by hammering on with my index finger. Now with traditional tapping, like Eddie Van Halen style, used to leading with the right hand. So in this case, I'm leading with the left hand. This is something to be aware of if you haven't done this before, but it's a really nice sound. So I'm stringing 2 of these 3 patterns together to make that first group of 6. And I have this kind of octave jump. It's almost like a C minor arpeggio. And with a drop tuning like this, I can do this in the same fret, right? But instead of doing a straight C minor arpeggio, I'm bringing in that flat 2 from Phrygian. So that's the pattern of 6. Now the pattern of 5, I'm just getting rid of 1 note in the left hand. And that starts on the 5th of the scale, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's basically a pattern of 3, 3, 3, 2 to get the 6 and 5. So that's how that looks, and then that part repeats again. And you have this pattern of 7. So I'm doing the 6 again, and then bringing in my ring finger of the right hand. If you haven't done this multi-fingered tapping stuff before, that'll also be a little bit weird. So you have to go, in this case, ring, or middle right to ring. That kind of sound. So the whole part together. And a couple of things arrangement-wise. So I have the bass guitar and the left hand of the piano just like pounding out these root notes at the beginning of each of these patterns of 6, 5, and 7. And that's just kind of providing a nice low bass for this. And then I have piano doubling this particular riff. So that's kind of what's happening there. And as far as how I'm constructing this, I'm trying to think about the contour of the overall line. Like we're basically rising throughout this whole riff. So starting low and slowly going up. And you can kind of see it on the sheet music, this sort of like whoop, 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 kind of slowly gets higher and higher. And we'll see more of that in the second measure of the riff. But for this first measure, you kind of have this slow rising effect. You're starting on the root, then on the 5th, and then the 5th again. The second measure here is the same as the first rhythmically. It still has that 6, 5, 6, 5, 7 pattern, but we're just moving up a little bit higher on the guitar. So the pattern looks like this slowly. So the first group of 6 and 5 is the same as the first measure. And then the next group of 6 and 5, on the last 2 notes, I go up a little higher. Up to the G string. And there you have to hammer on from nowhere with your ring finger, which is a little weird. And then this last group of 7 is where it gets quite different. So I'm doing this. It's this octave shape. So you have C, D flat, G. So root, flat 2, 5, and then I do the same thing up an octave, and then do that 2-finger tap thing again. And this is exactly an octave up from where that happened last time. So all together, so you get this kind of call and response between the first measure and the second measure, where it's slowly rising in the first measure and then rises even further in the last measure as a response. So it's this cool kind of cascading effect. This is quite difficult to play, and I haven't actually played this in a long time, so there's probably no way I can do it up to speed right now. When I recorded this too, I also used like a hairband to kind of help keep the muting down. Totally a valid thing to do. I think if I was to ever perform this live, I'd probably have a hairband kind of sitting here and then, put it over to help me out. But I'll string the whole thing together here at a moderate tempo, and you can kind of see how it works. Let me do just the first measure kind of up to speed. So a couple of things about performing this. One is that you have to hammer on pretty hard with the left hand to do these hammer-ons from nowhere. And that's actually helping me to kind of track where the rhythm is too, because I'm starting each of these patterns of 6 and 5 and 7 with the index finger. So if I hammer on nice and hard at the beginning of those, I can kind of track where I'm at. That kind of helps me out a little bit. The other thing too is what hand you end up looking at. Now for most of this, I'm actually looking at my right hand. You can't really go back and forth between both hands because they're both moving a little bit, but the left hand for the most part is staying in one position. So I'm really watching this right hand because it's moving a little bit more. And then at the very end of the riff, on that octave jump, right there when it jumps up an octave, I'll look at my left hand because that's a little bit tricky to make that jump. So something to be aware of. Sometimes it can be really hard to play these parts if your eyes are kind of, jumping back and forth between each section. So that's kind of how I put this part together. And I wanted it to be obviously something that was really kind of flashy and cool, but also something that had some kind of compositional sense to it, right? That kind of made sense as far as like how it's moving up and all that. And of course, these kind of big octave jumps are cool too. I don't want to just play the scale kind of straight up and down. I'm really focusing on these bigger jumps and also kind of hitting some of those important intervals for Phrygian. So there's a lot of that flat too, right? And also the flat 6. So you can basically tell right away that we're in Phrygian here. It definitely has that sound right off the bat. And this kind of in combination with the flashiness of the section and the drums and those low hits in the bass and piano makes this a really cool section overall. So here's the riff with the tab on screen over top of my original playthrough video that I put out a couple of years ago. If you want to check out that full video, I'll link it down in this video's description. I'm really proud of how this song turned out, so you can go check out the whole thing if you enjoy this particular part. And here's the riff. So there's some insight into how I put this part together. I know it seems really complicated on first listen, but hopefully this breakdown kind of gave you an idea of how I might put something like this together. And if there's other riffs of mine or other people's that you want me to cover, please let me know. I love doing that kind of thing. And if you enjoyed this lesson, subscribe, hit the bell notification, like, comment, share, and I'll see you all in the next video. Till then, stay proggy.